Let me tell you a story. It's about what happened on April 5th, 1968, in a tiny rural town in Iowa. A third-grade teacher named Jane Elliott ran a 2-day classroom exercise that would make her famous around the globe and a total outcast in her own community. This is the story of that experiment, the explosion that followed, and the woman right in the middle of it all.
But here's the thing. We're not going to start back in 1968. No, we're jumping forward decades later when Jane Elliott, by now an internationally famous educator, decided it was time to go home.
So she tries to go visit her old classroom, room 10, the place where it all began. But the school secretary just glares and says, "I know who she is." And her words just felt like bullets. The door was quite literally shut in her face.
Now, you have to understand, this is a woman who has given lectures to Fortune 500 companies, the FBI. She's been on Oprah 4 times. And yet, in the very hallways she once walked as a teacher, she was being treated like a total pariah. The hostility was just palpable.
So what gives? Why was she getting this freezing cold reception? Well, to figure that out, we've got to rewind the clock. We have to go back to the day a national tragedy forced a small-town teacher to ask herself what on earth she was really teaching her students. This whole story, this entire controversial legacy, it all started with a single moment. A spark, really, from a television news report the day after a king's death.
The night Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, Jane Elliott was watching the news. She saw a white reporter ask a grieving Black community leader, "Who's going to control your people?" And that question, that automatic division of us versus them, it hit her like a lightning bolt. She realized her all-white students, in their bubble of a town, they couldn't possibly get it. So she decided she had to show them.
She knew just giving a lecture on brotherhood would be completely useless. I mean, these were 8-year-olds. Most of them had probably never even met a person of color. No, she had to make them feel it. She had to make them walk in someone else's moccasins, even if it was just for a little while. So, how'd she do it? The very next morning, Friday, April 5th, 1968, her students walked into room 10. They were expecting a totally normal day. They had absolutely no idea their entire world was about to be turned upside down. She stood in front of the class and announced that for that day, the brown-eyed children were superior. They were cleaner, they were smarter, they were just plain better. And the blue-eyed children, well, they were the opposite. And these weren't just words, oh no. They came with a whole set of rules, privileges for one group and harsh restrictions for the other. Now, to get these 8-year-olds to actually believe this, she gave them a scientific reason. She went up to the blackboard, wrote the word melanin, and explained that this chemical, the one that made their eyes brown, also made them more intelligent. And the sound of that chalk on the slate, it made it feel like an undeniable scientific fact. And what's really chilling is just how fast this whole lesson took hold. The kids didn't just follow the rules, they internalized the prejudice. That response from Ricky, the brown-eyed boy, Jane Elliott didn't prompt him. That came straight from him just minutes into the whole exercise. The change was, well, it was instant and it was profound. Blue-eyed students who were usually super confident suddenly couldn't remember their multiplication tables. And shy, quiet brown-eyed kids, they transformed into these arrogant, cruel little leaders of the classroom. The teacher they loved and trusted had told them they were superior, and they believed her, 100%. But then, on Monday, she did the unthinkable. She reversed it. Now, the blue-eyed kids were on top. And this is where she noticed something really remarkable. The blue-eyed kids, having felt the sting of discrimination just the Friday before, were way less vicious in their new position of power. They already knew what it felt like to be on the bottom. So you'd think this little classroom lesson, something cooked up overnight in a living room in Riceville, Iowa, population 840, you'd think it would stay there, right? Nope, it was about to become a national phenomenon. It all started with some essays the kids wrote, which got published in the local paper. Then an Associated Press clerk in Des Moines spotted it and put it on the national wire. And pretty soon after that, the phone rang in the principal's office. It was Johnny Carson. From there, it just completely exploded. So how did America react? Well, this chart says it all. After she appeared on The Tonight Show, the NBC switchboard just lit up like a Christmas tree. Hundreds and hundreds of calls poured in, and most of them were furious. One woman even wrote in saying, "How dare you try this cruel experiment out on white children? Black children grow up accustomed to such behavior," which, of course, was exactly the point Jane Elliott was trying to make.
So, the national outrage was one thing. But back home in Riceville, the reaction was deeper. It was way more personal and, well, it has lasted a lifetime. Okay, so here's the absolute core of the conflict. In all the decades since this happened, two completely different stories have emerged. For many people in her town, she's this arrogant opportunist who traumatized kids just to get famous. But for so many of the actual students who went through it, she was a hero who taught them the most important lesson of their lives.
Some of the students just remember the fear and the intimidation. They remember a teacher who seemed way too strict, who they felt was being cold and cruel during those 2 days. For them, the memory is just one of pain. But then you hear from so many others, and for them, the experience was a total revelation. They say it's woven into the very fabric of who they are, that not a single day goes by where they don't think about it. They actually credit that 2-day exercise with making them more compassionate, more fair, and more open-minded adults. Which brings us to the big, fundamental debate at the heart of this entire story. Was this an act of educational malpractice, or was it a stroke of pure teaching genius?
Well, Jane Elliott herself has never, ever backed down. She argues that her exercise is an inoculation. You know, like how we give kids a shot with a tiny bit of a virus to protect them from getting the real disease. She says she gave these kids a small controlled dose of discrimination to protect them from the much, much more dangerous disease of racism. She doesn't apologize for the pain. In fact, she says it was absolutely necessary for the lesson to stick. Her logic is just unyielding. The discomfort her white students felt for 2 short days is nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to what children of color experience every single day of their lives. And so her experiment leaves us with this huge, powerful question. It's one that educators and parents are still wrestling with today. What is the job of a school? Is it just to teach facts, reading, writing, arithmetic? Or is it also to help shape a child's moral compass, to build their character, even if the methods to get there are, well, really uncomfortable?